Just kidding, guys. Just kidding. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. Happy Tuesday morning. Hopefully, none of you are in line for the storms today. I know we've got another possibly severe weather day, evening. Good morning, Rob. Good morning, Karen. And that video I was opening with is just a joke, clearly. Just a joke. Because I honestly, you guys aren't going to agree with me. I already know it's already okay to post the hate. I'm perfectly fine with it. I think we're losing this battle with Iran. I know you think that's probably going to be crazy. I'm going to explain later why I feel that's happening. And I'm not going to say that because we've got some big weapons in our arsenal, but we can't necessarily fight in Iran the way we could fight to win a war. So we're going to talk about that. I want to talk about Major General Neil or William Neil McCasland that is missing. The guy has a wealth of information when it comes to UFOs and different types of technology, being that he was the head of a program at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which I think most of us know is where the good stuff is kept, not Area 51, but Wright-Patterson. We're going to talk about that and why his disappearance is very strange. People disappear all the time. But I think it's very interesting that he disappeared right when Donald Trump said we were going to start to declassify and report on some of that information. Good morning, Sherry. Good morning, Robert. Good morning, Michelle. Good morning, Kim. Good morning, Vernon. So we've got that to talk about today. Some of the other things I wanted to jump into. How quickly my mind forgets. I'm like, I write it up and then I forget what it is I'm going to talk about. But I will remind myself here in just a moment. So I want to talk about that, of course, General William McCasland's disappearance. We're going to talk about whether or not we're losing the war. Secretary of Defense Hegseth says today is going to be the big day. But yeah, I think they say that every day, don't they? Every single morning I wake up, today is the day. We're going to hit them hard. Nothing happens. And then we'll see. Maybe today will be different. Maybe we don't want that to happen. We'll see. We're going to talk about some of the damage being inflicted on Israel. I've got a video of their Haifa refinery being blasted. South Korea returning their defense systems to the United States. Why? Because we need them. And of course, Trump is talking about peace. ABC is reporting that the government has received the signal that the sleeper cells have been activated. They're hearing the chatter, and you know what that means. I don't think any of us needed to wait for that message now, did we? I think there was some other things that told us that could potentially happen. We haven't talked about Nancy Guthrie in a while. I'm not going to get too big into that situation, but for those of you who followed that case, I'll tell you, nothing's being done. It's the strangest case maybe ever. I don't really know much about Savannah Guthrie. Quite honestly, I probably wouldn't like her if I knew her, and as terrible it is about Nancy, Nancy Guthrie hated Donald Trump. She hated conservatives. She hated the MAGA movement. But at the same time, she's still a missing mother, grandmother, 84 years old. She didn't deserve whatever happened to her, regardless of whatever her political beliefs are. And I don't expect, and never expected from day one, for them to find her alive, sadly. And it's just crazy that here we are, what, weeks in, and there just doesn't seem to be any information despite $1 million reward. That's what's the craziest part is. Now, of course, we don't know what investigators know. They could have received some very legitimate tips, and those tips just have not led to a recovery as of yet. I'll tell you about, and many of you already know this, but let's just say as an example, if you yourself know, you just know somebody in your family, some of your friends, some stranger, who knows, is responsible for, let's say, the homicide of another person, and because maybe they told you, maybe you saw the weapon, maybe you know the whole story. Okay, so you decide you're going to call in a tip because there's a reward or just because you want to do the right thing. So you contact law enforcement and you say, hey, I know what happened. I heard the story. This person confessed to me. Let's even go that far. This person confessed to me that they did it. They showed me the weapon. I know they have the weapon, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, police are going to say, all right, well, we're going to go out. We're going to talk to that person. So they go out and they talk to this person. This person's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't do a single thing. I was home at night. I was asleep, blah, 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 blah. Well, investigators can go so far into looking at this person, but if they don't have proof, if they don't have the weapon, if they don't have, some solid evidence, none of that matters. It's just hearsay. They cannot arrest somebody and prosecute someone because you heard a confession or because they did it. It just doesn't work that way. So there's got to be backup. There has to be proof that this crime occurred. You have to be able to prove it. Investigators have to be able to prove it. Sometimes that doesn't happen. I can't tell you when I was writing my crime blog how many cases, and there are so many, how many mysterious cases where investigators know exactly who did it. They know who did it. They just can't prove who did it. So the person is still, listed as missing and unsolved or a cold case because even though they know who did it, if they don't have the proof and they can't take it to prosecute, what difference does it make? And so that could be the case with Nancy as well. And good morning, Kelly. Good morning, Kim. Kim says, I am honestly surprised that MAGA hasn't been blamed for her disappearance. Kim, in the original opening days, when Nancy Guthrie first went missing, there was a lot of talk of that. In fact, I don't know who it was, but there was somebody who I think was a pretty notable person who had even hinted that, hey, because people hated Savannah Guthrie. Some people do. I don't hate her. I don't even know anything about her. But I guess she hosted some town hall, which I do remember. At first, I just didn't connect the dots, where she was pretty harsh, on Donald Trump. Some of you have seen those videos replayed, and somebody suggested, well, maybe it's some crazy MAGA person who didn't like how she portrayed Donald Trump. I mean, come on. We are not the party of violence. I'm not going to say there's not some wackos within the MAGA movement, because there are people who are extremism is dangerous no matter what side it's on. But never in my mind did I expect that to be the case. And I will never think it's a kidnapping for ransom. There's nothing about this case, nothing that speaks cartel. There's nothing that speaks kidnapping for ransom. I don't even know what to think. If my initial thoughts would be that it would be somebody that she knows. Something went wrong, and somebody she knows had to, for whatever reason, get rid of her. Before she turned them in, maybe before something happened, and they just had to do something to her by a certain amount of time. But, we don't know, is that true? Investigators, while they have focused on some of her family members, nothing has really come out of that. Then you have, of course, the video of the potential suspect, maybe two suspects, that's kind of up in the air. And then you think, okay, well, that person looks like a random homeless person around the city of Tucson. There's 2,300 homeless people in the city of Tucson in that general area. And there have been a number of burglaries in Nancy's neighborhood. And I've got plenty of video, and you've probably seen them, of various burglars who are believed to be the homeless population in the area, who are running around in those same type of backpacks, who look exactly like that person did. So, I mean, could it be a burglary gone wrong? Then people say, well, if it's a burglary gone wrong, why would they take her body out of the house? She seemingly was just injured. We don't have any way of knowing that. You can look at the blood pattern and think, well, you see the transition of somebody who was up high. But there's been people who said, well, maybe they had slung her over their shoulder, and carried her out. I don't know. I don't think she survived past that night, regardless, whatever it may have been that happened. There's a lot of talk that she had a safe inside the house. We just don't know. No one knows. But it's really strange, in my opinion. This case has been strange since day one. Since day one, there's been a lot of things that just have not made sense. Nancy says, Stormy Tuesday. Good morning, Kevin. And so, there's not much going on with the Nancy Guthrie case. I'm actually surprised, quite honestly, that we have these journalists still camping out in front of her house. Good for them. They're, obviously they're probably doing a combination of likes and, I don't know if they're have an account that makes money, monetized account, but they're probably doing it partially for that, but partially maybe because they really care. A lot of people who follow crime and are reporting in these types of crime, just really they're fascinated by these types of situations. Sometimes some people think it's like a puzzle. You're trying to put all the pieces to the puzzle and solving that puzzle. Other people do it because they just genuinely care that, hey, this 84-year-old mother and grandmother is missing. It's, not about her family, because look at McCasland. Here's what's so crazy is that we have William Neal McCasland. He is a retired Major General who has been in charge of the space program out of Wright-Patterson. The guy knows all of the secrets, everything that's going on at Wright-Patterson that has to do with UFOs. McCasland knows. He knows all that information. And he just walked away from his home. Just walked away. This was on February 27th. He is married. His wife made a report that said the last sighting of him, she apparently noticed he went missing earlier in the morning, but I believe the last sighting of him was around 11 a.m. because the family of McCasland is looking for people who have surveillance video, footage of any type to show him on foot sometime after 11 a.m. But the area where he went missing is pretty desolate. And I'm going to show you a video in just a moment of where he was missing from. Good morning, Colonel Adams with the Washington Guard. And it's a strange case. Maybe Colonel Adams, maybe you need to go out and look for Mr. McCasland because he is out there missing somewhere. A silver alert was issued. But I've been really reading up on this case. Everything points to him being cognitively fit, physically fit. He was, from what I understand, he normally did run, through these trails. I'm going to show you this area in just a moment. It wasn't unusual apparently for him to be on foot and up on the trails. But what was different this time is he didn't take his phone and he didn't have his watch on. And I've read, I can't confirm this, I read that he does run, but when he does, he always has his watch on, a fitness type tracker watch. But he didn't have it on that day. And no one seems to know. He walked up onto this trail and disappeared. And it wouldn't be the first time that's happened. It's pretty. As a matter of fact, when everybody was looking for Nancy, there was a guy there in Tucson who was an older gentleman who went up into the trail. And I still don't know exactly what happened to him, but he did somehow succumb to some type of health issue and passed away up there in the trails. It took them a few days to find him. But what's so weird about McCasland is everyone's looking. The FBI is looking. It took a while for the FBI to get involved. And then I think somebody kind of sounded the alarm and they said, okay, there's this guy who is a major general, that's a pretty big deal. William Neal McCasland, who is missing, and he's got all the UFO secrets. He knows everything that's going on at Wright-Patterson, and he's missing. His mind alone is just a trove of information. And, could be potentially sources who would like to retrieve that information from him. There's obviously people out there who might be interested in that type of thing. But it's kind of strange. I'm going to show you the video of where he disappeared. I'm going to try to mute this really fast. There's a guy who went out looking for him and made the video. There's no reason for us.
Good afternoon.
For us to hear him talking, but so here he is. This is where McCasland was last seen. Was walking in this general area of these trails. There's no way to track him because he doesn't have his watch. He doesn't have his phone with him. There's obviously no cameras out there. So it's like you got to think, okay, why on this day did he leave his home February 27th in the morning hours and head out here without his watch and without his phone? Now, somebody could say, well, maybe he really was cognitively impaired and, that's just not been reported that was the case. That certainly is a possibility. We just don't know. But, then obviously this is a very desolate area. He could have went anywhere from there. But I would think that people close to him may have known, what trail he normally followed, which trail most people normally follow, and then of course there's the other side of things. People are saying, well, hey, maybe the aliens took him. I don't expect that to be the case, but maybe stranger things have happened. But I mean, as you can see, this is a really desolate area. And so they're searching right now the Sandia foothills, the national forest there. There's some wilderness terrain they're looking at, and the FBI is out searching for him, obviously trying to obtain some information. They say he probably left around 9 a.m. on February 27th. His wife had looked for him and came up with nothing. Just came up with nothing. It's a really strange situation. 68 years old. That's Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was last seen in the area of Quail Run Courts. And they said the direction of travel is unknown. They don't know what he was wearing. They don't really know exactly what time he even left his home, which is even, it's definitely a big mystery. But, he's married, but that doesn't mean that his wife knows. She may have been gone that morning or just not even thinking about it. But, unless it's a cognitive issue, who would leave their home and head out to this area without their phone, or their watch. It's kind of strange. And it's also very strange, like I said, that he goes missing as soon as Donald Trump starts talking about releasing classified information. So maybe that's the conspiracy theorist in me thinking that there is something more to his disappearance. And there's not really anyone can do. I don't know of any wide scale search efforts. We've not had any of these big groups out there like, Texas EquiSearch or the Cajun Navy. No one's out there searching for him. I think somebody needs to be. He's 68 years old. That's quite honestly fairly young. And if he truly is, in good physical health, good cognitive health, there's something here that just is not making sense. It's just not making sense. Now, I did hear that potentially he does take some type of medication, and that's why they issued the silver alert because they thought, well, here he is out, on the trails. He doesn't have his medication, doesn't have his phone, doesn't have his watch, and we don't have any way to track him out there. It's just strange. Don't you think it's strange? Surely I'm not the only one who thinks that's a very strange situation. But we'll keep updated on it. That's all there really is to know for now. There's not really a lot of information out there on his case. He just seems like your typical normal guy, retired from the military, whatever reason, retired in Albuquerque, lived in Ohio, of course, at Wright Patterson for many years as he headed up the space program there. But, here we have somebody with all the secrets. This guy knows it all, and he's missing. He is missing. So hopefully they find him. We'll keep updated on that situation. But, I've got to be out of here by 9 o'clock. So we might as well, get to some of the good stuff here. I know, Colonel Adams, you're probably definitely, if you're still listening, I know you're not going to agree with me. I think we're losing the battle in Iran. And it's okay. You can blast me all you want. I will not be upset or offended because I know that sounds absolutely insane. I know that it does. I think, if I don't know who's been following me for how long. I've been saying this since 2012, since I first started talking about politics on the radio back in the day. And I used to talk about Iran quite a bit back then because Iran has always been a topic of conversation, haven't they? For far longer than that. And even back then in 2012, a lot of us knew and talked about the fact that Iran has been very much underestimated. And I think a lot of that's propaganda. We, the United States, we're not free from propaganda from our government, especially under Democrat control. And the propaganda doesn't necessarily end. Sometimes propaganda is used for strategic purposes. So that's not really that unusual. However, I think we've been so propagandized, just like in my opinion with Russia, and you can disagree with me on that also. I never seen Putin or Russia as being our enemy. I've always said, that I think that's some old Cold War propaganda, that Putin actually and Trump seem to have a pretty decent relationship. Putin seemed to have a pretty good relationship really with our government all along for the most part. And I really think that's just a bunch of old Cold War propaganda that people still have in their heads that Russia is the enemy. And there's so many people who I talk to who say, oh, Putin's a communist. Russia's a communist country. Putin has never served as president under a communist regime. They haven't been communist. What, somebody correct me, I think 1981, something like that. Sometime in the 80s, they haven't been a communist country for a very long time. And Putin is actually a Christian man and very much against communism and some of the other things we see. But Russia is a of course ally of Iran. But the only person who's profiting right now from this situation in Iran is Russia, right? They're the only country who's profiting. China's going to destroy its economy soon enough if they don't get some of those tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, which as of last night was completely closed. I don't know what it's like early this morning. I know that the price of oil had dropped because Donald Trump said, oh, I think the war is over. And now it's going back up again today. And, Trump can't make up his mind. One day it's over. One day, we're going to hit them really hard. I think that they don't really know. I'm not going to say they don't know what they're doing. I think that there's just a lot of propaganda involved, a lot of back and forth. But I do think that people underestimated the power of Iran. I mean, they've had nothing to do for the past 47 years other than to make missiles and to make different types of technology as much as they could. I think a lot of people, drones in particular, I think a lot of people think of Iran that they're all just sitting around, using all their resources to make nuclear weapons. And And that's just not the case. They're a powerhouse and they're just throwing out those drones, and because they've always known that one day they're going to need them. And I do believe the estimates that they had about 3,000 missiles when this situation began, or maybe when the 12-day war began before. Uh, I don't know if I believe that they have 80,000 drones. That seems like a lot, but you can make a lot of drones perhaps kind of quickly. Allegedly, they only cost about $25,000 to make their type of drone. Iran is a fairly wealthy country because of their reserves. They've got plenty of money to go around, and they haven't really used a lot of their missiles or their drones. They haven't had to. Yes, they have proxies, but they're not really throwing out those drones and those missiles like a lot of people probably think they do. And let's see here. Jay says, when China is your main ally, you're no friend to America. But Jay, here's the thing, Jay, we got to stop thinking in that way, because we think of China as not being our friend, but everything we own is, guess what? Made in China, right? I would say China is more of our ally than most people think they are. Everything they have, China could shut down our economy in 2 seconds. 2 seconds, we'd be done. There'd be nothing left. We wouldn't have anything. Literally, you'd have to go build a cardboard box to live in because all your building supplies come from China, right? You'd be dead because all your medications and your surgery supplies come from China. And we also have to remember that Donald Trump's strategic plan, it's written in the books, is the Core Five, which is an alliance with Russia, China, Iran. I mean, not Iran, India. Sorry, I always get the I mixed up. The Core Five would be the United States, Russia, China, India, and Japan. So Donald Trump has a strategy that includes China and Russia. It doesn't oppose them, it includes them. NATO's not our friend. Those are the countries in the G7. Those people are not our friend. They hate us. They hate everything we stand for. Look what they're doing to their own countries. They don't want us to win in the United States. They don't want us to have freedom in the United States. Nobody has freedom in these other countries, do they? You make a social media post, you go to prison for 4 years. Those people hated Donald Trump. They did everything they could to keep him from winning the election here in the United States. And so they are not our friends. Donald Trump knows they're not our friends. But right now we need them. And the reason why I say that I have concerns about losing this war, it's not because we don't have a strong military. It's not because we don't have good weapons. I mean, if Donald Trump really wanted to, he could go over there and drop the MOAB right in the middle of Tehran, right? But not without killing a bazillion people. So we can't do that. We don't have the proximity to use some of the technology that we have. There's a lot of areas where I'm sure we, the United States, would like to strike within Iran, but we can't because it's so heavily populated in these areas. We cannot kill all these innocent civilians. And I don't care, you can tell me till you're blue in the face, I will never believe it. We do not have a strategic supply of missiles and interceptors. We just don't. We don't. Why? Because we had Joe Biden as a president for 4 years. And during those 4 years, we weren't doing a darn thing but funding, transgender surgeries and trans kids in schools. That was their main focus. It wasn't empowering our military or preparing for war. So yes, I'm not saying a disservice to our country. I think Donald Trump obviously is doing the best he can do. I think our military is absolutely fantastic. But the big bombs and the big things we have, we just can't use them. So we're stuck, trying to defend Israel, trying to defend our bases from all of the missiles and drones that Iran is launching at us. And I believe we're about to lose that battle if we don't have a little more help from our friends. And let's see here, let me backtrack. Good morning, Matthew Nickerson. Jay says, our previous presidents decided to make the world economy more important, and these terrible trade deals caused our jobs to go to China. Also true, not a good plan at all. Linda says, good morning. Good morning, Linda. And Jay says, yesterday was the least amount of drones and missiles fired. Yeah, and that's been continuing to happen. But you know what? Iran is still continuing to launch drones and missiles. They're continuing to do so. And every single time they do, they're hitting their targets. And quite often we're intercepting some of what they're throwing at us, but not all of it. The oil refinery in Haifa was hit in Israel. I've got a video of that, and it's hard to obtain, quite honestly. It's hard to obtain some of this video and footage, but I do have one. Let's see, Jay says, totally 100% disagree with us losing in Iran. And Jay, like I said, the reason why I'm saying that we could potentially be losing this war, not because we don't have the military power, not because we don't have some really fantastic weapons. We're just limited in what weapons we could use because we don't want to take out a good portion of their population. Right now, we've hit them as hard as we can. What more is there to take out? Even Donald Trump said that yesterday. What more can we do? He's like, he feels like this war is, kind of coming to its close because there's nothing more we can do. We've taken out pretty much their entire Navy fleet, right? We've taken out all of their top leaders. Now they have a new Ayatollah. I'm sure he's probably got a target on his head. But if we can work out something diplomatically with him, then there's no reason to do that. But I quite honestly, I'm not even sure what we set out to do. We've got Lindsey Graham talking about we're doing this for oil because we want to, control 30% of Iran's oil. I played that video for you yesterday. And then we have, of course, Israel, who I really just think they want to completely annihilate Iran for good reason, of course. And then I think we, the United States, we're looking for a regime change. A regime change is not going the way we had planned on it going, is it? Because every time we take somebody out, they've got 10 more people to replace them. The president of Iran is still alive. Nothing's happened to him. They have the grand Ayatollah. Yeah, we know who Ayatollah Khomeini is, but there's a grand Ayatollah. That person's still around. No matter how many people we take out, guess what? They are still launching missiles at us at all of our bases. And here we had retired Colonel Greg McGregor the other day, who Colonel Adams and I trust, I think, wholeheartedly, who came on video. He's given a couple interviews over the past couple days, who said, our military bases are destroyed. We cannot land and take off from these military bases. We can't use them right now. They're not strategically great for us. And so therefore, as we know, we called in all of our friends, our fake friends, our allies, and said, hey, we need your help. We're having some problems here. We need your help. We need to use your bases. Spain said no. Donald Trump got in a big spat with Spain, remember, over Spain saying, no, we can't use our bases. The UK said, no, you can't use our bases. They changed their mind, of course, too late by the time they did. France, Macron stepped up and said, hey, you can use our bases. Excellent. And now Donald Trump says, hey, we're probably going to back out of this war at this time. Where I think we're done here. Israel, I haven't heard anything from them or what they think. Israel, again, taken on a lot of destruction. They don't talk about that, but there's been areas in Israel that have been completely flattened. And I've seen the videos, I've seen the photos. It is happening. You're not going to see it on mainstream media because they don't, for strategic purposes, they don't want you to see it. Understandably, they don't want the enemy to know how much damage they've caused. They've had casualties in Israel. I know because I've seen them. There are certain ways you can, in channels you can, tune into where you can see these types of things. It's not propaganda. It's real lives being lost, real people losing their homes and their communities. So, what price are we willing to pay for a regime change, to take 30% of their oil? What is it we're going to look for? If we withdraw now, what? They're just going to be right back to where they were, right? In my opinion, that's losing. If we withdraw right now, that's losing. We accomplished nothing in Iran at this point. Absolutely nothing have we accomplished. We took out the Ayatollah. Okay, so what? There's another one now. Nothing. We've done absolutely nothing. There's not a regime change. The people have not been able to step in and take over. We've not gotten rid of their nuclear weapons yet. They said we'd have to have ground forces to go in and take out their nuclear capability. We haven't done that yet. And Donald Trump said yesterday he doesn't expect us to have boots on the ground. He thinks he's changing his mind. Now, today we hear South Korea has had to give back our missile defense systems that we loaned them for them to use for their own defense. We took back our there's two different types, the THAAD missile defense system and the Patriot missile system. South Korea said, we don't want to give them up, but we're in no position to make that choice. The United States needs them in the Middle East. So they are en route to the Middle East because guess what? Because we do need them. We need them. Iran continues to launch missiles and drones at us, and we're becoming very vulnerable. Every day we say, we're going to launch this big strike against Iran, and then nothing happens. And Jay says, plenty of targets and infrastructure left. I think it will take boots on the ground to ensure an end to this regime. I agree, Jay. I absolutely do agree with you on that. But now, Donald, but we're back and forth, right? Nobody's going to tell us what the plan is, and they shouldn't, because if they tell us, guess what? They're telling the enemies. One minute they're saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to have boots on the ground. They're going to go in and get that uranium out, any of the supplies they have to potentially make a nuclear weapon." Then the next day, no, 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 no. We'll never do that. We're never going to put boots on the ground. We're done here. Yesterday, Donald Trump said, "We're done here." In his mind, this war is over. We're done. There's nothing more we need to do. And then today, Secretary of Defense Hegseth said today is going to be the biggest day. We're going to launch the most strikes on Iran today. But they also said that yesterday, the day before, and the day before that. And I'm not really seeing a whole lot going on, quite honestly, on either side. And Layla, however, Trump said that on day one, we can take out 45. There's 45 more to take their place, and so on and so on. We knew that no matter how many leaders you take out, there's more to follow. So we know that. Yeah, you're right, Layla. You're absolutely right. And Donald Trump definitely does know that. And Jay says the people who are part of the regime are dictating new leadership after Iran kills 30,000 of its people, and they're scared to step out and get involved. That's absolutely true, Jay. And Layla says, let's see, I really don't want boots on the ground. I don't want boots on the ground either. I think it's a very dangerous situation for us. And, we were doing our best to try to get the Iraqi Kurds to go into Iran. And again, nobody is going to go on to the news and tell us their strategy. Now, one thing, there are facts I can tell you, and then there's that big gray area where strategically we're not supposed to know what's going on. So we don't know what's going on. Now, the Iraqi Kurds were allegedly that's the thing with modern day. Of course, you have all of these different people on the ground reported. We have that instant news. So let's say an Iraqi Kurd tells his buddy, "Hey, we're going in. The United States armed us, and we're going to make that ground incursion, or we're going to find our way in to Iran and help with that regime change." Well, guess what? That guy goes on social media and posts it. And then you have people like me who see that post and start talking about it. And what happened with the Iraqi Kurds is that publicly they said they're not coming into the United States. However, I know, and this part you can count as fact, we, the United States, did arm the Iraqi Kurds. We gave them weapons so that they could go into Iran and they could be our boots on the ground. So I am 100% positive that we did give them weapons. Now, what happened after that, I don't know. We know that Iran obviously took the threat seriously, that the Kurds were going to come in because they started lobbing missiles and drones at them. So we know that they're like, "All right, Kurds, don't even think about it because we're ready for you." and they started hitting targets, of course, in their areas, and they were hit pretty hard, over the weekend. And then, of course, the Kurds made a very public statement that said, "Hey, United States, you really screwed us over in Syria and on other occasions, and we're not fighting for you. We're not hired guns. We're not doing your dirty work." But at the same time, that's kind of contradictory to them accepting our weapons. So Colonel Adams, if he was here, he could probably explain this to us a little bit better, why they might take our weapons and then decide, "Hey, you screwed us over. We're not going to help you." Or is that just what they're stating publicly so that there's some type of element of surprise? I don't know. But right now, really ask yourself, what have we achieved outside of taking out the Ayatollah, and some of the IRGC and the Navy? Their Navy, I mean, most people didn't even know Iran had a Navy, right? So does it really matter that we took out their Navy? They weren't doing anything with it anyway. So I would say no, it doesn't make a difference. So what exactly, if we withdrew today, what have we accomplished outside of taking out the Ayatollah and some of their military forces? I mean, there's 100 million more people who are going to step up into those roles. So I don't think at this point, if we withdraw, in my opinion, we've lost. We've lost 8 American lives. Many estimates say many more than 8. We've certainly had a lot of injuries. The number has not yet been reported. Our military bases, I believe Colonel McGregor, when he says, I don't think Colonel McGregor is going to come on to mainstream media and give interviews and say we've lost our bases, because that man, he knows some people, and it not be true. He's not going to put his career on the line in that way. And he's the only person really even talking about anything, period. And we know that our government contractor, I can't recall the name now. I have it down somewhere. I'm not going to bother looking it up. I posted about it yesterday, has stated that, they're delaying. Normally they post photos and information and data about the status of our military bases. Well, they have delayed that. It was delayed by 10 days. Now it's delayed by 14 days. They don't want to publish that information. They don't want us to know what our losses are, in that situation. Can we win the war against Iran? That's a whole different question. That's not the question we're asking right now. It's where do we stand today? Where do we stand today? We don't have 30% of their oil. We don't have a regime change. We've not crippled them in any way at all. We've actually just made them really mad. And if we withdraw today, we have lost. We've lost. We have not accomplished anything at all today. And what happens if we continue? That's a whole different story. I'm not saying that we cannot win a war against Iran, but if we withdraw today, just like Donald Trump is saying we plan to do, hey, the war's over, what he said yesterday multiple times, then guess what? We have lost. You can agree to disagree, but we have lost if that is the case. And let's see. Layla says, I think the only thing for us to do is to arm the good people of Iran. We've done that to some degree, but not heavily so. And let's see here, they're going to have to fight their own war to survive. If our intelligence is good, which I think it is, we already know who's capable of receiving arms to fight the regime in their own country. I agree. And, when this first started, Donald Trump and others in his, in leadership positions said, hey, Iranian citizens, this is your time. If we're going to have a regime change, it is up to you. Get out and do what you need to do to make that happen. And Iranians have taken to the streets, but they've not done anything as far as a regime change. And I think it's probably just maybe not within their capability to do. They probably just don't have as much access to. I'm trying to scroll down the comments, but I always have such a hard time grabbing my little scroller. It's probably not as easy to do for them to reach the people they need to reach. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll down in the comments. I don't know why my little comment grabber doesn't like, there we go, it doesn't like to work. And Jay says, everything Trump says is strategic. Absolutely, as it should be. We shouldn't know what's going on. Jay says, no conflict has even been won without boots on the ground. I hope we don't have boots on the ground. I hope we do find, something like the Iraqi Kurds to go in. I know we're doing our best. You can see it. I know I can see it. To get these other countries in the Middle East to go after Iran. There's a lot of talk whether or not that missile launched towards Turkey really came from Israel or Israelis, I should say, or Americans or Iran, because early on, I played the video last week, early on, there were people in the UK who said that we can see when missiles are launched, we know where they're launched from, and that launch did not come from Iran. But then they wouldn't go any further to say where it came from. So we still don't know. Then they backtracked on that statement. They said, oh, yeah, for sure, that missile came from Iran. We don't know. That's just like the missile that they said hit the girls' school. I think the point a lot of people are missing when they look at that video where you see that Tomahawk missile coming down, that Tomahawk missile, that's not the one that hit the girls' school. The girls' school had already been hit, so that's not it. The Tomahawk missile you see is one coming down at a military installation just near where the girls' school is. So there's two different things that could happen here. I'm still not convinced that that was a Tomahawk missile that hit that girls' school, launched from Americans. I'm still not convinced of it. And I think a lot of people are misinterpreting what they're trying to say. The Tomahawk missile, you've all seen the photo of it. If I could post photos on this show, I would, but they're really hard to load. But the Tomahawk missile you see coming down, that's hitting a target nearby. That's not the missile that hit the girls' school. There is no video of that missile that hit the girls' school. So it is very possible that we were hitting a target very near to the girls' school. And Iran said, hey, we could easily turn this into something else and maybe kind of change the public perception. And I hate to say it, I don't know anything about whether Iran would do this. To me, they've always seemed like they're kind of tit for tat. They're not going to take out their own people, but yet we've already seen how they just killed, some people say 35,000, some people say 80,000 of their own people. So what is the life of a bunch of little girls at a school to them when you look at the big picture? So I'm still not convinced that that was the United States that launched that Tomahawk missile at that girls' school. I'm not. At the building near it, absolutely so. We have video of that. But surprisingly, there's no video, no slow motion video of the missile that hit the girls' school. And it's not the one they're showing you, that I know. And let's see here. Layla says, as a military wife and a military mom whose son is deployed. Oh, Layla, I will be praying for your son. And I have zero idea of any details. My husband told me to stop believing everything. You have the most, let's see, you have to have the most common sense. Yeah, Layla, you can't believe everything you hear. And there's a lot of information out there that we really just don't know one direction or the other what to believe. One day, like I said, one day they say, oh, the Iraqi Kurds are going in. We're going to send our troops, we'll put our boots on the ground. We're going to go in there and get that uranium to make sure that Iran cannot ever, ever be able to make a nuclear weapon. Could start. He's talking. I have not even heard that. Would have talked about it, but I read the news. And I have never heard anybody mention the fact that Iran was making a missile capable of hitting the United States. I've not even heard it one time other than my original source. And that was a missile that was capable of having a nuclear warhead. And I really think if the Trump administration came out and they said, hey, we had to do this because they were creating a missile States, maybe people might have a different view of what's going on instead of having old warmonger Lindsey Graham giving all these interviews. You can tell he's absolutely giddy over us being at war. He's wanting us to go to war in Lebanon. He's wanting us to do all kinds of crazy things. He doesn't care about American lives being lost, unfortunately. I'm sure somewhere along the line, my opinion is that he's probably getting a kickback, somewhere through all of this, and that's why he's always so happy about going to war. But we really need to ask ourselves, if it's true. Now, of course, Lindsey Graham said yesterday after Donald Trump made the announcement that he thinks the war is over. It's winding down. This is it. We're done. That Lindsey Graham said, well, I hope not. and I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not going to say I hope not because I don't want to lose any more American lives. I'm certainly ready for this situation to end. But if we end it today, we have lost. We did not accomplish any of our missions at all. So then what is our next step? What is our next step if we want I don't even know what the mission is, or is it just about oil? Like Lindsey Graham said, we just want 30% of their oil. Is it possible that our win is that Trump could diplomatically say, and this is why I don't think this is going to work, but Trump could, of course, reach out to the new Ayatollah and say, hey, we're going to stop hitting you. We're going to stop striking you. We're going to stop killing your leadership, including yourself with a target on your head, if you just agree to some type of oil or mineral deal. Now, Iran's going to go tell him to put that where the sun doesn't shine because they don't need us. Iran does not need us. They don't care. They absolutely do not care. And they're going to say, no, we're not making any deals. We're not going to make a deal with you. We've got plenty of missiles left. We've got plenty of drones left. And, we're just waiting for the right moment. And there's a lot of people who on both sides of the fence believe that Iran is literally just waiting. They're trying to outlast our missiles. They keep thinking, okay, if the United States continues to use their missiles and continues to use their interceptors, eventually they're going to run out. They're going to be completely defenseless. And then we're really going to destroy what's left of their military bases. I've not heard of any attacks, from Iran onto the United States directly outside of the sleeper cells, right? So what is our next move? Pete Hegseth again said today is going to be the biggest day of strikes, but they've said that many days, as I said. We'll see what happens today. We'll be talking about it again. Tomorrow, we'll catch up again tomorrow about that aspect. Where do we go from here? Because if we quit today, we've lost. Keep that in mind. If we quit today, we have lost. We've accomplished absolutely nothing. Zilch. In fact, we got rid of some of the factors, the bad actors that were in the Iranian regime, but they've just replaced them with worse people. So where do we stand today? I can guarantee you that there are some folks on the Trump administration who are talking today like, okay, we have to make some decisions. We're not going to be able to do this diplomatically. Iran's not going to, they have no reason, to work out a deal with us. So where do we go from here? Do we take every last person out? Do we put boots on the ground? We're going to have to make some very serious decisions, or, we have 8 American lives, possibly more, lost in vain, not to mention what Israel is losing. They're paying a very serious price over in Israel, far more than we have. And Jay says, outlasting the U.S. is never going to happen. I don't agree with you, Jay. Now, it depends on what you're talking about. Now, we've got some big bombs and some big missiles and some big weapons, but we're not going to be able to use those in Iran. Unless something very serious happens, we're not going to use those big weapons in Iran. We can't, because if we do, we're going to kill too many people. We don't want to do that, because then guess what? The world is going to turn against us. We're going to have other countries step in, and we will end up in World War III, right? We don't want this to be more than a conflict, a short 2, 3, 4 week conflict. That's all we want. So I don't think necessarily that you're right on that point. I will agree to disagree with you, but I absolutely do think that Iran has more missiles than we do. I think I'm not going to say they're a stronger military or they have more capabilities, because that's not true. But I do think they have more missiles than when we do. And I think that's a very common sense thing to believe, because they have had nothing to do but build missiles and drones for 47 years, while we, the United States, have not bolstered our military in quite some time. Now we're ramping up production now. We just gave Lockheed Martin yesterday, we worked out a contract for $700 million, to create more parts and more materials for us. We're doing our best to ramp up our military, but Trump's only been in office since January. We haven't had that much time. And the past 4 years, unfortunately, were not spent on ramping up our military. So I think we're in a very, precarious position right now. Do we go in and use the big stuff? Do we put boots on the ground? Or do we back out now and having lost and serve no purpose at all? All we can do is wait and see what happens. And Leila said, I heard somewhere, and I can't remember where this is mostly about China. I don't know. I don't know. I know that this is hurting China because they're not getting that petroleum. They're not getting their oil, tinkers through the Strait of Hormuz. Like I said, it was completely closed yesterday. And there's a lot of back and forth with all of that. Leila says, my husband, who's been to the Middle East, deployed many times, the only thing he's ever told me is these people won't stop until there's death to America. You got that right. So they're not going to lay down their weapons. They will fight to their dying day until we are destroyed. And see, Layla, I agree with you. They're not going to give up. And Layla says the United States isn't mentioned in the Bible in the end. However, God remains in control. And that's a tough one, Linda. I don't know how this all. A lot of people talk about the biblical, implications here with the war that's going on, and I haven't looked into that as much as I've been, talking more about strategy and that type of thing, and where we are, where we're going. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of Bible implications in what's taking place right now. We talked about that story the other day, and Pete Hegseth even made a statement yesterday. I can't recall exactly what he said about him being Christian and fighting for God and these different types of things. And so there's a lot in this, no question. There's a lot in this battle, but I think Layla's right. Iran's not going to give up. They're going to fight to the end. They're not going to go out easy. They're going to continue doing whatever they can to harm us militarily. Now, yes, we have a more powerful military. Yes, we have better weapons than they do. But it's a different situation if we start using those weapons, using that strategy. Then we're going to bring a lot of countries in that we don't necessarily want to bring into this situation. We've got to be very, very careful and walk that fine line here. We've got to be very careful. We don't want to end up with World War III, which could very easily happen, quite honestly. Things could escalate very, very quickly. So we're either going to see us backtracking, saying, hey, we've done what we wanted to do, even though we haven't, and being done with this situation, or we're going to have to bring out the big guns and start doing something that does make a difference. What that is, I don't know. I think we're in a tough spot here for sure. And and then we have the sleeper cells, of course. And let's see, Lori says he has been in office over a year. When do we expect positive changes here in the United States? That's another good question, Lori, because you know what? There's not a lot going on in our country. Americans still, I talk to people every single day who tell me, I'm still struggling to buy groceries. Gas prices went down. Now they're going back up, even though that's just temporary. And I'm still struggling to survive. I'm still paying all these taxes. And here we are fighting a war in Iran over what? How's that going to help me here in my home? How's it going to help me survive? And I will say, as much as I support Donald Trump, and I think you guys all know how much I do, I fought really hard, for him to win the presidency, of course. But, at the same time, yeah, it's been a year. There have been some really good, fantastic things that have happened. But for whatever reason, I think in Donald Trump's first term, he really did focus on America first, making America great again. Remember, that was the big slogan. We don't hear that slogan as much this second term. And we've talked about this on the show before. I feel like this term, the second term he has now, we're only in the first year. We've got a couple more years to go. But I think as of right now, he has very much focused on foreign policy. Now that could be because he's focusing on foreign policy because that will strengthen us as a country. That's certainly a possibility. But we do see a lot of focus on foreign policy versus here in our own country. And God knows we need the help here in our own country. And I wish they would do a little more multitasking and doing a lot more for Americans while they work out foreign policy. But I guess they can only be stretched so thin. And Jay says, besides freeing Iranians, it's putting a major crimp in China's economy. It is, Jay, but as you know, that's just temporary. It's putting a big crimp, quite honestly, in a lot of the economies in the Middle East. And eventually they're going to start getting upset. Some of these other countries are saying, hey, United States, you put us in this position. We allowed you to have your military base in our country. Now you're using your military base to attack Iran and causing instability in the Middle East, and it's affecting our economies. They're at capacity with oil production. A lot of countries have cut down their production. I read this morning, like by 30%, some say 60%. So yes, it's economically hurting people. Other than Russia, Russia's profiting greatly. And Jay says, in our market, sorry, there's a glare right on my computer. And our marketplace insurance went up drastically because we can't afford the insurance through my wife's employer. And nothing is being done about, yeah, you're right, about expired subsidies. There's a lot we need to do right here in this country. And let's see, Layla says, I will say I think he's trying to do a lot for American people. However, our own Republicans don't get anything done. You got that right, Layla. We have bills that sit and nobody passes. And I think the Republicans in Congress, in the House, that do nothing to help him advance things that would help the American people. I couldn't agree more. Jay says the bombing of the girls' school never happened. Oh, Colonel Adams says the bombing of the girls' school never happened. I don't know, Colonel Adams. I mean, are you saying it never happened by the United States or it didn't happen at all? We don't know. I will tell you, in the initial video I saw, the very first video I saw that very day, minutes later, the news is instant these days. Minutes later, there were people on the ground at the girls' school. And I will tell you, there were no urgency. There were no bodies. Now, if there are bodies, I have yet not to see them. I've not seen any bodies of little girls. Not that I want to see bodies of little girls. I saw no parents crying. I saw no urgency. There was nothing going on in that video that told me that a bunch of school children had been killed. And to this day, I have not seen anything to report that outside of, Iranian news saying the United States killed, what is 183 school children. I've not seen any proof of that whatsoever. None, absolutely none. And trust me when I say I have looked. So Colonel Joe Adams, I may agree with you on that one. I do see that a building was taken out and maybe it was a school, but for all we know, Iran might have been using that building for military purposes and there were no little girls, because whenever, if you watch the bigger picture of that airstrike, or we see the airstrike that was near the girls' school, and you see where the smoke is from the girls' school. And if you look, there's people all over the place and they're everywhere. And nobody's freaking out too bad. They're not running around like you would expect. And those were neighborhood girls. I didn't see parents flocking over there wailing and in tears. And when you see the video, which I still have, by the way, the video of that day outside of the girls' school, there's absolutely no urgency. There's no moms crying, no dads crying. There's just nothing going on there. People are just kind of milling about, looking at the building. And, then later on, you see all these search pictures and different things. And the story just doesn't correlate. Jay says, just like the Palestinians claiming Israel blew up a hospital, right, which was really a military unit. And Jay says, no, it's pushing us to become their natural gas and oil provider. Maybe, Jay, we'll have to talk more about that. Colonel Adams says total propaganda, no bodies, no blood, no body bags, and no video of carrying out little dead girls. I agree. I absolutely agree, Colonel Adams. I've watched countless videos of that area. I have seen zero bodies of little girls. I have seen zero grieving parents. And in Iran, they would be showing every last iota of information that they had coming out of that school bombing. And I agree. I have seen Nothing. And I have looked for it. I have seen nothing. If you have anything to prove it, please send it to me. And the Tomahawk missile, again, like we said earlier, that they keep showing, that's not the one that hit the girls' school. Even if it was or was not a girls' school, that's the one that hit a military structure that was near the girls' school. There's no video that has been released of the girls' school being struck. There's nothing there. Anyway, so one of the other things I want to talk about before we head out, because I've got to go in a minute, is ABC News reported that the call has been made to activate the sleeper cells. And what they were talking about is that, obviously we have the NSA, we have the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, all these different agencies who are constantly listening to the chatter. That's how they foil a lot of various terror plots, is they hear that chatter because they're always listening, and even to you, even to me. And when we say certain words, that chatter is picked up. So when the chatter starts increasing and they see it's going up and there's more chatter coming back and through, back and forth, and they say, okay, there's something going on. And then they start paying a little bit more attention. Well, they have apparently heard credible threats directly tied to Iran that allegedly the sleeper cells have been activated, saying, hey, now's the time, if you're ever going to do it, today's the day, or now is the day. And so, we'll see what happens. Like Colonel Adams and I talked about yesterday on the show, is we're seeing these incidents pick up. We've had 3 in the past week between Austin, the airport situation, and then of course the guys in New York City. And we've had a terror plot that was foiled, in which there was someone with Iranian ties here in the United States that was caught by the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI prior to him being able to carry out an attack against our elected officials. And one of them from apparently being Donald Trump and some of his staff members. So that's a very serious situation. And I can guarantee you, where there's one, there's many more. Now, I don't need ABC News to tell me that the sleeper cells have been activated. I think many of us got a clue whenever the Grand Ayatollah said he was issuing a fatwa, on Donald Trump and his administration and those who support him, which basically is the call for revenge. And then we also saw the primary mosque in Iran raise the red flag of revenge last week. Those are all big signs that, hey, if you're the sleeper cell, it's time to wake up. It's time to act, because they're at a very pivotal point here. Iran, I'm sure they're also contemplating, where do we go from here? Is America and Israel going to continue to attack us, or are they going to force us into a regime change? And just like Layla said, they're not going to go out easy. They're going to continue to fight as hard as they can possibly fight. They're going to fight as hard as they can fight. They're going to give it every single thing they have before they go out. Think about it in your own home. Here you are in your house, okay? You're the ruler of your own castle, right? And somebody comes over and says, you got to leave your home and you have to leave everything behind. And if you don't, we're going to destroy you. So they take out your neighbor, right? And then here you are still standing in your home. And you think, you know what? Before they kill me, before they displace me from my home, before I lose every single thing I have, I'm going to go out with a bang. I'm going to do every single thing I can, because I am nothing if I don't have my home and I have to leave all my possessions behind. And I'm sure that's exactly how Iran feels. That's their home. They've been there under rule for 47 years. It's more than just a government. It's an ideology that they have, an ideology of controlling at least the Middle East, with their Islam, their ideology of Islam, and they're not going to just give it up. Everything that they worked so hard for, they're gonna lob every single thing they have at us. They're going to attack us in our homeland. They're not going to give it up easy. We, the United States and Israel, we just got to figure out, where do we go from here? Do we call it quits now, and having lost this battle, and say, okay, we've lost troops and we've lost our air bases, we've done all of this, and some of these air bases we may never be able to go back to. So where do we go from here? I think that we're not quite done with the battle. I think if we were, I don't think South Korea would be sending our missile defense systems back to us. And for anyone who says, oh, we're militarily fine, if we're militarily fine, we wouldn't be begging all of our European allies to send us their interceptors, their missiles, and their missile defense systems. We're not militarily fine. We could take out Iran in a second with the right weapons, but we just can't use those weapons because we literally cannot take out all those lives. All right, guys, I guess that's pretty much everything I've got to say today without continuing to repeat the same stuff. Let's see. Jay says, be careful because the major networks are in love with the sensational news stories. Exactly, Jay. But that's why I don't trust ABC News to tell me what to think. We all talked about it last week with the red flag of revenge being raised, with the fatwa being called, and we can see it. You don't even need anybody to tell you to be able to see that things are changing. There's things going on. So, I'm not going to get into that today anymore about the sleeper cells. We talked about it quite a bit yesterday. And Layla says open borders should have been the first clue, and Democrats, let's see, don't pay in the Homeland Security and TSA. Yeah, yeah, we've of course they've defunded the TSA, they've defunded Homeland Security. They don't want us to be safe now, but did they ever know? Sleeper cells are voters and they're voting Democrats, right? That's the way I think about it anyway. But anyway, either way, we'll see what happens today. Hegseth said we're gonna strike the biggest strike of all days today. I don't know if I believe it. We'll see how it plays out. We'll see where things go from here. We've got some decisions to make as a country. We're either going to have to really step things up and use some weapons we haven't used yet, or we're just going to have to say, okay, this is as far as we're willing to go. We're not willing to go any further. And then we're going to have to withdraw. And then we're just going to have to go back to square one and say, okay, well, now what? They're still going to be making nuclear weapons. They're still going to be making missiles and drones, and we've just really screwed ourselves. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes. We'll see. All right, guys, I will see you all tomorrow. We'll see how things play out today. I'm sure there'll be lots of news and things happening, and we'll cover it all at that time. I don't know if I'm going to be here on Thursday. I do have I don't always work, I'm usually working nights, not in the mornings. I work late tonight, but I plan to still be here in the morning. And we'll certainly be here on Friday for sure. Thursday is a little questionable right now, but either way, we'll catch up tomorrow. We'll see what's going on today. We'll see if those big airstrikes are carried out. If there's any more word on boots on the ground, or hey, maybe Donald Trump says, hey, I was serious. We're going to withdraw. We'll see. We'll see. All right, guys, have a good day. Stay alert of the weather, and I will see you all.